My daughter visited me today. It was not a pleasant one for either of us, and I don't think she left happy. She was sweet and friendly and welcoming, but too much time has passed, and the wound is too deep for me to return any of her affection without much thought and heartache. She said what she wanted to say and left without getting what she came for. She wanted me back in her life. I told her I'd think about it, and when she left, I cried. Megan is a grown woman with children of her own, but at the same time, she is the same little girl I cradled on my lap when she was 3. She is smart, articulate, attractive, and according to her sister, a good wife and mother. I have to believe she is, because she is the image of her mother. She even has her mom's stubbornness in her. She is everything a parent could ever dream of. So if she is so wonderful, why haven't I said a word to her until today for 5 years? It all started with her mother's act. I remember the last words I spoke to Megan like it was yesterday. It was 5 years ago, at her mother's funeral, after one of the most emotional days of my life. I approached Megan at the burial site and told her with all the bile I was capable of that she was as dead to me as the woman we had just put in the ground. Then I jabbed my index finger in my son Stuart's face and told him the same thing. Glancing around the crowd of shocked onlookers, I frowned, making it clear that my words applied to them as well. The stunned reaction of my family and friends and the look in their beady eyes will burn in my soul for the rest of my days. This is the pain I will carry with me to my grave. Pain born of the destruction of our family, the death of their mother, and the loss of their father. That day I walked away from it all, holding the hand of my youngest daughter, Faye. I fell in love with Connie almost from the first moment we met. It seemed like we had been together all our lives. We loved and were in love with each other from that very moment. God must have used us as a model of the perfect couple because we were like apple pie and vanilla ice cream, beautiful separately, but absolutely the best together. Even before we said our vows, we looked so much alike that everyone said we were already old marrieds. That was back in high school. We got married after college and had just celebrated our 25th wedding anniversary. Then something happened that I still to this day can't fully explain. Our 25th wedding anniversary was a grand celebration. It was a beautiful, sunny June day, and all of our family and friends were there to celebrate with us. My father was in a wheelchair and sat at the head table with Connie's mother and father and all 3 of our children. All the friends and neighbors congratulated us and showered us with gifts that were more than we could use. Even the mayor of the city stopped by to give us a small gift from him and our friends on the city council, a sign proclaiming June 14th as Connie and Mark Jenkins Day. Over 200 people gathered under the big circus tent and laughed, ate, and danced until late into the night. When it came time to reaffirm our vows, I don't think a single eye was left dry. I know for a fact that neither Connie's nor mine did. But I didn't see anyone else's. I didn't see our children standing next to us at the altar. I didn't see our families holding hands in the front row, and I certainly didn't see our golden retriever, Bo, curled up in a fecal ball at the preacher's feet. I saw nothing but Connie, the woman who completed me, the woman I loved and had always loved, and the woman I planned to devote the rest of my life to show how much I loved her. Our oldest daughter, Megan, had gotten married a month before our little celebration and had returned from her honeymoon the week before. Stuart had just finished his 2nd year of university, and our youngest, Faye, her first. It was great to have everyone back home again. I would never say it out loud, but I missed the noise and pandemonium of the kids at home. I think Connie did too. At least for a while, we were a family again. A few days after our anniversary party, I was returning all the chairs, tables, and other party equipment to the rental place when I bumped the fender of my truck a bit in the parking lot at home. I turned the corner too sharply and damaged the headlight of a brand new Lexus. The cop who wrote up the accident report was one of those guys who grew up with Stuart and played on many of his sports teams. Greg was no longer a kid. He was taller than I was, and his uniform gave him an authority that made him even taller. I watched him grow up and was as proud of him as I was of my own children. After our business was done, we just stood and chatted about nothing. The end of the conversation planted a seed that sprouted like a weed in my fertile mind. Well, Mr. Jenkins, Greg said, extending his hand for a shake. It's time for me to head back to the station. It was really nice to see you again, and I'm sorry I couldn't make it to your anniversary party. My parents said I missed a really good time. I shook hands with the man I'd watched try to steal second base in baseball. He'd always been thrown out, but he'd grown into a man I was proud to call a friend. Oh, and tell Mrs. Jenkins to be careful and stop at stop signs from now on, he said with a mischievous smile. Next time I'll have to give her more than a warning ticket. I'm sure my confused expression said it all. Oh shit, I didn't mean to say the wrong thing. Now he looked embarrassed. I immediately picked up on his awkwardness and tried to help him out a little. At the same time, I tried to figure out what he meant to say. It's okay, Greg. Connie doesn't always tell me when she gets a ticket. She thinks I'm going to get mad at her and take away her driving privileges. I won't do that, but I let her think that. So, to give me an edge at dinner tonight, what did you fine her for? I might want to tease her a little about it, that's all. Sorry, I shouldn't have said anything. I don't want to get anyone in trouble. It's really no big deal. My smile got even wider and I said pleadingly, No, no one was in trouble. Just a little friendly teasing, that's all. What happened? A couple of weeks ago, Saturday the 31st, I think, your wife was turning from the Holiday Inn parking lot onto Highway 40 without stopping for a stop sign. She didn't hit anyone or obstruct traffic, but she accelerated so fast that I had to pull her over and tell her to slow down. I had to write her a ticket for missing the stop sign, but there was no harm done, so she got off with a warning. No harm done? Yeah, no big deal, Greg. You did the right thing. I'll be sure to tell her to watch her driving and give me a little tweak at the same time. Thanks. It was nice to see you again. I unloaded the chairs and tables and then sat in the truck, reflecting on the little conversation I had with Greg. 2 weeks ago, on the 31st to be exact, I was at my dad's house for the weekend, helping him with chores he was no longer able to do himself. It was also 2 weeks after Megan's wedding. I remember taking Dad to the adult home that day to look around and see if he wanted to finally get rid of the old house and move into something smaller. He wasn't interested, and I knew he wouldn't be interested, but I had to try. I spent all day Saturday with him and got home around 9 p.m. Sunday night. I didn't notice anything strange, and Connie didn't say anything about the ticket she got from Greg. She said she spent a quiet afternoon at home and did some reading. I figured Greg must have misremembered something, because Connie would never lie to me. So I categorized it as strange and inexplicable. About a month after the anniversary party, my sister called and said she found my father on his kitchen floor when she came to visit him every other week. He had fallen that morning and was unable to get back into his wheelchair on his own. She said he wasn't hurt, just confused. I immediately made plans to go see him on Saturday and try to convince him that moving to a more modest place where there would be people around to help him would be in his best interest. Maybe this time he'll be scared enough to listen. Probably not. He's a hard-headed old prankster. Since Stuart and Faye were home for the summer, I asked no, even forced them to come with me. I played the guilt card. You guys haven't seen Grandpa in a while, and he won't be around forever. They agreed to go. Connie said she would enjoy the quiet day and that she was looking forward to finishing her book. During the hour-long ride, Stuart talked about a girl he met in a philosophy 101 class who he really liked, and Faye said she was going to finish college without the boyfriend problem. She'll have plenty of time to hook up with a guy after school. We had a nice discussion about the merits of both positions, which inevitably led to me talking for probably the 100th time about how their mom and I met and became a couple. As the kids hugged him and sat down to listen to his old, oft-repeated stories, Dad was more excited than I'd seen him in a long time. We ate lunch, talked, and just enjoyed the morning. Around noon, he fell asleep in his chair, and we all split up to let him rest. Hey guys, stay here and watch Grandpa. I'll be right back. I need to go get something to take down that old, dead tree in the backyard before it falls on the house. And Stuart and Faye went into the living room and watched TV while keeping an eye on Grandpa. I, on the other hand, intended to go home and get the chainsaw, ropes, and whatever else I needed to take the tree down. I don't know why I turned that way, but I turned off the interstate onto Highway 40. At the bottom of the hill, I saw the entrance to the Holiday Inn across the street, and again, without thinking about why I was doing it, I turned into the motel parking lot. When I stopped and looked around, I saw the stop sign at the bottom of the hill that Connie had driven over and realized that it could easily be missed by anyone, even me. I circled the parking lot to leave when I saw something that wasn't supposed to be there, Connie's car. I stopped and took a closer look to make sure I wasn't imagining things. I know there are a lot of silver Toyota Camrys out there, but only one has her special license plate, Conwoman. I got out of the car, looked inside, and saw nothing unusual. The doors were locked. I couldn't think of any legitimate reason why she might be at the Holiday Inn, since she told me she wanted to binge with a good book, so I decided to see if she knew where her car was. I called the house and got an answering machine. When I called her cell phone, she answered. "Hi, honey, how are you?" Her voice was cheerful and happy. I don't know why I lied since I'd never done it before, but I did. "Oh, nothing. I was grocery shopping for my dad and decided to call you. I called home, but since you didn't answer, I decided to call your cell phone. Where are you?" "I'm at the mall. I finished my book and decided to do a little shopping. You don't mind, do you?" Wow, she just lied to me. At least I think so. "No, just don't waste money on the kids' college. What time will you be home?" "Probably around 6. Do you want me to make dinner?" "No, I don't think I'll be hungry. I'm starting to feel not so good. I'll probably just stay at Dad's tonight and send the kids home. I'll let you know." "Okay, just call me when you decide," she said in a sad voice. "Oh, did you go to the mall by yourself or with someone?" I asked, hoping not to hear another lie. "I went by car. I'm by myself. I just got here a few minutes ago." "Why?" "Just wondering." "Well, I've got to go. Have a good time, and may Greg not catch you at that stop sign at the Holiday Inn when you leave tonight. Bye." I hung up the phone and waited. I don't know what I was expecting, but certainly not what happened. I heard a muffled scream coming from the direction of the hotel. I looked around but saw nothing, especially the source of the scream. I sat on the hood of Connie's Camry and looked around. A few minutes later, a police car pulled up and Greg got out of it. "Hello, Mr. Jenkins. Did you call 911? "No, Greg, I didn't." "Well, someone called and said someone was breaking into a car in the parking lot. I better go inside and talk to the manager." "Greg, can you do me a favor?" "Sure, Mr. Jenkins, anything." "When you go inside, could you ask if Mrs. Jenkins is there and who she's with? I'll be right next door." "Okay, wait. Oh shit. I'm sorry, Mr. Jenkins. I'll be right back. I'll find out what's going on, come back and talk to you. I'm sorry." He got back into his cruiser and drove toward the entrance. I waited and waited, but nothing was happening. Finally, a siren wail was heard in the distance. It got closer and closer and finally ended when the car pulled up to the entrance of the motel. The attendants got out of the car, loaded someone into the back a few minutes later, and drove off. Greg got out, pulled up, and walked over to me with the saddest expression I had ever seen on his face. "I'm sorry, Mr. Jenkins. There was a little problem inside. The ambulance took your wife to county hospital. It appears she tried to run through the sliding glass door. The door didn't shatter, but she is badly bruised, has a cut above one eye, and is hysterical. The gentleman who was with her left when the ambulance left. I have his name and address and his statement of what happened. I'm sorry I can't give you that information, but you can come to the station tomorrow and fill out a Freedom of Information Act form and get it. Again, I'm very sorry that this happened. I've always considered you and Mrs. Jenkins' family." He held out his hand to shake mine, but all I could do was stare at it. It wasn't until after he left that the tears came. I don't know how I did it, but I walked back to Dad's house and stood in the driveway, not knowing which way to turn. Faye sensed something was wrong when she saw me standing there and ran outside. "What's wrong?" she asked, but I was too dazed to speak. She started talking louder and louder until I broke down and cried in front of her. I never cried in front of my children. She started crying too when she saw her father disintegrate right in front of her eyes. When Stuart came out, I told them through my tears that their mother was in the hospital and that they should go help her. I didn't say anything more or tell them what I had just experienced, but within seconds they were in the car and ready to go. I tossed the keys to Stuart and told him I wasn't going. "I'm staying here tonight." They looked at me like I was a three-headed snake, but drove off anyway. I made sure Dad was okay and collapsed on the couch, feeling my heart pounding in my chest. I just stared at the floor and cried. Dad rolled out and sat down next to me. "What's wrong, Mark? What's bothering you?" I could never talk to my dad about intimate things. He's an old-school dad and always kept his emotions bottled up and under control, and I guess I was a lot like him. When I had problems as a kid, he would just say, "Act like a man and everything will be fine." I half expected the same advice this time, so I didn't say anything. But he did say, "Let me tell you a little story about your mother and me that I've never told you or your sister or anyone else. Right after you were born, I got in trouble with the law. I stole something from work. Your mom wanted a fancy red dress and I didn't have the money to buy it for her, so I stole a tool and sold it. I got caught. I eventually paid the money back to the company, but they fired me anyway and then turned me over to the police. The authorities put me on probation for 1 year. That was the easy part. Your mother was more angry with me than she had ever been in her life. She was probably more disappointed in me for what I did. It hurt our marriage badly. For a long time, she was cold to me. One day, she came home and said that she may have found a new job for me in the neighborhood where she works, and I could go there and interview in the morning. Then she hugged me, looked me straight in the eye, and told me she forgave me. Son, she forgave me for almost ruining our marriage. She put aside her pride and let me back into her heart. From that day until the day she died, I never did anything that she wasn't proud of. I became a better man because your mom loved me. Sure, it hurt her for a while, but she was a better person than I was, and we got through it. Mark, I don't know what happened, but you seem to be in the same boat as me. Maybe you need forgiveness, and maybe you should forgive like your mom did, but maybe what happened can't be forgiven. Whatever the problem is, I know deep down you will do the right and reasonable thing. I just hope to God that things work out well for you. I may not tell you this too often, but I'm very proud of the man you've grown up to be, and I love you very much." He placed his old arthritic hand on mine and bowed his head in silent prayer. When he finished, he quietly turned and walked away to his bedroom. I was left sitting on the couch as the sun dipped below the horizon. During the night, my cell phone rang, but I didn't answer it. The same thing happened with my cell phone. I could hear them because I had been up all night. I just lay curled up on my father's dull old couch and listened to the crickets outside the window. Next chapter. The morning should be a new beginning. Yesterday had passed, and today was a new day. But I still felt on the edge of a precipice. After making breakfast for Daddy, I went out into the backyard alone and started rummaging around. Around noon, I felt a hand on my shoulder. "Hey, Dad, are you okay?" said Faye, looking down with tired red eyes. I just shook my head. No. Faye sat down next to me and hugged my neck like she was 3 years old again. She was crying too. We sat like that until it was time to talk. I didn't want to say anything because I wasn't sure I could keep from snapping, so I let Faye start. "Dad, Mom's okay. She has a concussion, 4 stitches in one eye, a broken nose, and a few bruises. But physically, she'll be fine. Emotionally, she's just a wreck. The doctor gave her something to relax and go to sleep, but she wakes up screaming your name, and it starts all over again." Megan showed up at the hospital, and we were all by her side. Mom just asked why you weren't there for her, and she cried. "Dad, she told us what happened and told us what she did. You probably already know everything, so I won't repeat what she said. I want you to know that I tore her apart. I told her that is the worst thing a person can do to another person, especially someone they say they love. I told her I hated her. She... Wait a minute, girl, I interrupted angrily. Don't ever say you hate your mother. She loves you and you love her. She did something wrong, and I have to figure out what to do about it. Dad, she cheated on you. She lied to you and to us. She doesn't deserve our love. What she did doesn't matter. She's your mother. Yes, she is my mother, but she is also your wife. Do you still love her after what she did? I was silent for a long time, trying to make sense of my new world. I don't know. I'm still in shock. I need to get my emotions and thoughts under control before I say or do anything. Right now, I can't think because my heart hurts so much. I don't know what to do. Daddy, I will always be there for you. Whatever you decide to do, I will support you. I may not agree with your decision, but I will be there for you. I love you, Daddy. We hugged and cried, and finally sat down to watch the hummingbird flit back and forth between the holly trees and the old oak tree, each of us immersed in our own thoughts. Next chapter. I spent the weekend with Dad and talked to Megan and Stuart on the phone. I refused to talk to Connie when they asked. I wasn't prepared for her to see me or hear me talk in the state I was in. When Monday morning came, I called work and told my boss that I had a family emergency and needed a couple days off. I spent the next 3 days sitting in the backyard and wallowing in my sorrows. Faye never left my side. I think she was worried about what I was going to do. I sat in the backyard and thought about how well Connie and I had spent the last 25 years. Things weren't perfect, as in any marriage, but the good times far outweighed the bad. I didn't know all the details of what she had done. I think my children knew more than I did, but one thing I knew for sure, I couldn't know it anymore. Knowing the little I did know was hard enough, but hearing a detailed description would have been killer. The lunch Faye had brought me lay uneaten on the table next to the roll of paper towels I'd used to wipe away my tears. It had been 2 days since my world had been turned upside down, but my thinking was no clearer than it had been yesterday or the day before. Hey, Mark! A familiar voice burst my thought bubble and set off the whirlwind of emotions again. Without turning around, I muttered, Hi, Connie. I waited, unmoving, and watched her pull up a chair across from me. I didn't know what I looked like, but if I looked half as bad as she did, my next stop would be the morgue. I'm sorry, Mark, she said, looking at her hands. They had always been beautiful and strong, like all of her hands, but now one was discolored with a large bruise and the other was covered with a Band-Aid. When I first looked at her face, I saw a hideous bandage crossing the middle of her face, holding the broken bones of her nose together. A large gauze bandage over one eye hid the eyebrow and the stitches under it. Around the other eye was a hideous black and orange bruise. She looked like, as Faye put it, a train wreck. She used to be so beautiful, and now she was so ugly. I don't know how much of my opinion of her appearance was due to my broken heart, or if she really was ugly. Mark, I came here to apologize. I know apologizing isn't enough to make things right, but it's all I have. Megan drove me here because I'm still too upset to drive. I needed to see you, to talk to you, to make you realize what I did to you, to us. Mark, I messed up. Me, not you, me. You didn't do anything wrong. You didn't deserve any of it. No matter how much I hurt you, I feel just as hurt, if not more, because I did it. I hurt myself, and possibly ruined something that means more to me than life itself. Mark, I want to tell you what happened, and maybe... No, I don't want to hear anything from you. What I know now is tearing me up inside. If I hear anything more, you'll kill me for sure. Just don't say anything, please. But Mark, if you know what happened, maybe there's a chance you'll forgive me. Mark, I don't want to lose you. I love you, and you need to understand why I was weak and did what I did. It started... No, damn it. I said I don't want to hear it. But Mark, you have to listen. It's the only way I can. No, we can get through this. It's the only way we can heal and be a family again. Please, Mark, just listen. I said no. I stood up and walked away, leaving her sobbing in my black and blue arms. "Daddy, please listen to her," Megan said, coming up to me as I walked to the kitchen. "She needs you to listen and forgive her. She needs to tell you what she did and apologize so you can get over it." I turned, looked at my oldest daughter, and spit out the words that started me on the path that would eventually lead to my demise. "Megan, if you think that listening to her story will make things better between us, you're even more deluded than she is. If she needs to soothe her conscience so badly, let her put it in a letter and send it to me. I'm not going to sit here and listen to her rambling excuses as to why she threw away a 25-year marriage and ruined me in the process. I can't be around her. I don't have the strength to forgive her right now." I got in my car and rushed away, not knowing where I was going or when or if I would ever return. I didn't cry as much while I drove because most of my tears were on the blocks of Dad's patio. Right now, I just needed to get away and think. Next chapter. When I got back to Daddy's the next day, Faye met me at the door with a smile and a hug. At that moment, I needed that smile more than anything. She told me that in the midst of all the misery in the world, someone could still be happy. It gave me hope that maybe someday I would be able to smile again. But it didn't tell me whether what I had decided to do would make anyone else smile. Dad was happy to see me too. When we sat down to dinner, I told my father and daughter about my future. "Dad, I've decided to move in with you for a while. I need some time away from everything, and you need me to help with the cooking and cleaning. And believe me, Dad, I've tasted enough of your cooking to know that you need someone who can cook more than just eggs and bacon. Faye, can you help me get something from home? I can't go over there while your mom's there, and I need some things for work here too. You can tell everyone I'll be living here until I find a more permanent solution. In the meantime, just tell them your mom and I are separated. Don't go into details, just leave it at that." "Okay, Dad, I'll come back tonight and get what you want. Just make me a list. Is there anything you want me to tell Mom?" "Just tell her I'm going to live here and that she doesn't have to call me. When I'm ready, I'll call her." I gave her my list and spent the evening discussing our new living arrangements with Dad. I could tell by the look on his face that he was glad I was coming home, but saddened by the reason why. He never once mentioned Connie or the events of the last few days. We even did something we hadn't done in years. We played checkers. He won, of course. When Faye came back with my things, I was surprised that the car was so full. "I brought my stuff too," she said firmly. "I'll take the guest bedroom and live here until school starts." She had a hard look on her face as she helped unload our stuff. Later that evening, I asked her what had happened. Faye's face contorted as she spoke. "Can you believe this, my sister? She said you were being childish and that you should come home and make up with your mom. And Stuart was just as bad. He basically said that everyone cheats on their loved ones at one time or another in their lives. There's nothing wrong with that," he said. "You should just forgive your mom and go get yourself a girl on the side," he said. Can you believe those two? Assholes. Now, Faye? Dad, I'm not in the mood to listen to this. You haven't done anything wrong, and here you are sitting at Grandpa's house and everyone thinks you're the bad guy. Mom's the one who ruined everything. She doesn't deserve to be forgiven. That's one of the reasons I'm here. Those three think you're wrong for not coming crawling back and apologizing. I couldn't live with all that and put my stuff in the car when I got yours. Faye was on edge. I knew it was impossible to convince her otherwise once she'd made up her mind about something, so I just sat in silence and let her vent her anger. Next chapter. For the next 2 months, I tried to lead as normal a life as possible. I went to work every day, helped around the house, and even taught Faye how to make vegetable lasagna. Every couple of days, I would get a call from either Megan or Stuart asking when I was coming home. In my mind, I could see Connie standing behind them, waiting for my answer. I told them that I was home with Dad, and that I didn't want to talk to Connie or hear anything about her. Once or twice they tried to say something anyway, but I just hung up. One day, Stuart showed up at the door and said he had something important to tell me. We went out to the backyard and sat on the patio so he could say what he wanted to say. Dad, you need to come home. It's been 2 months and Mom is worse than ever. I have to go back to school in a couple weeks and I can't leave Megan alone to take care of Mom. There's no telling what she might do when one of us isn't there for her. She cries all the time, doesn't sleep or eat. She has lost a lot of weight. Some of your friends have come to visit her and are just as worried as we are. She does nothing but sit at home and mope. We have tried to talk her into going out to eat or shopping, but she starts crying again. Daddy, I think you've punished her enough. You need to get over your little fight and come home. She's sorry, you're hurt, she's hurt, now get over it and come home. I just sat there and looked at my son. This is the man I coached in baseball and soccer and helped him earn his Eagle Scout badge in the Boy Scouts. But he's changed. He is no longer the son who made me proud of his grades and life choices. His values have shifted somewhere to the side. He thinks what his mother did is okay, and if it's okay for her, it will set a precedent that shows it's okay for him too. I have always told my kids that promises are important and should be taken seriously. I've always tried to instill good moral values in him, both by word and example. No, I think Stuart was as nutty as a fruitcake right now. Stuart, you're a man now, and I can tell you what I'm going to tell you, man to man. Get out of my house. How dare you come here and accuse me of being immature? I'm not the one who screwed up. If you support what your mother did, then you've changed, and not for the better. So go home and take care of your mother. I'm going to be here until I decide I'm not going to be here. Now get out of here before I kick your ass out. I got up and went into the house. A few minutes later, I heard his car drive off. Next chapter. Faye went back to school the last week of August. I hadn't heard from Megan and Stuart, so I figured Stuart was back in school and Megan was shuttling back and forth between her new husband and Connie. They didn't call to tell me anything. It was just Dad and me now. In mid-September, I got a letter from Connie. I started to read it, but had to put it back in the envelope and hide it in my dresser. My emotions were too strong. I told Megan that if Connie wanted to assuage her conscience, she should lay everything out in a letter and send it to me. Now that I had the letter, I couldn't read it. The wound was still open. Instead, I stuck my head in the sand and moved on with my life. Faye called every couple days to see how things were going with me, and of course, Dad. She said she had talked to Megan and Stuart, and they were doing the same for their mother. She planned to come to my birthday party at the end of October, and hoped I had already made a decision about my future fate. Sitting in uncertainty didn't do anyone any good. I told her we would talk when I had made my decision. On October 30th, I turned 50 years old, no small milestone in anyone's life. Faye showed up that morning and said she had plans to take Dad and me out for a big Italian dinner. She wanted to show me what real lasagna tasted like. I smiled at her little tweak to my cooking. I'm sure that smile was the first one I'd had in months. We got back from the restaurant late. I took my dad to his bedroom and made sure he was comfortable in bed, then went back to Faye's place. I handed her the beer, and we sat in the living room talking. So, Dad, can you tell me what you've decided? Faye had never believed in the indirect approach. Sighing heavily, I began. I've decided that I don't know everything, including why she did what she did. But my stubbornness and refusal to talk to her won't solve anything. I finally read her letter, and I'm not sure I believe everything she wrote. It's probably true, but I don't understand how anyone could be so stupid. And since this has gone on for as long as it has, I think reconciliation is highly unlikely. But I do plan to sit down with her and talk things out. Maybe we can work out our issues, maybe not. At the very least, I should give her a chance to say what she wants to say and hear how I feel. If I still don't believe her, then I'll have no choice but to file for divorce. I was as miserable without her as you say she was miserable without me. Well, I'll do whatever it takes to move forward, whatever that means for us. As much as it pains me, I'm going to meet with her and find out where we stand. I'll call her tomorrow and... The ringing of Faye's cell phone interrupted my planned speech. I wasn't finished, but I let her answer it anyway. "It's Megan," she said, looking at the phone's display. "I'll be outside." She got up and walked out into the cold night. 5 minutes later, she walked into the room with the biggest saucer-shaped eyes and ghost-like pallor I'd ever seen. She looked at me, at the floor, at the painting above the fireplace, at her cell phone, and then threw herself into my arms, sobbing uncontrollably. She sobbed on my shoulder and I held her tightly, waiting for whatever had caused her shock to pass. After a few minutes, she pulled away, brushed away her tears, wiped her eyes with her sleeve, and looking me straight in the eye, said, "Daddy, Mom's dead. Megan came home tonight and found her in the bathroom. It looks like she swallowed a vial of pills the doctor gave her to put her to sleep. Megan didn't tell me anything else." Everything in the world ceased to exist. I heard her words, but my mind didn't work. Death was not perceived. I couldn't comprehend. I couldn't see, hear, or feel. Connie's dead? I... Next chapter. Making funeral arrangements for the only woman I'd ever loved. The woman who had meant more to me than anything else in the world for the past 25 years, the mother of my children, yet had a lover behind my back, was an overwhelming task. When I was with the kids, I tried to appear stoic and in control, but they all knew I was barely on my feet. In the evenings, I would sit in the backyard of my house, looking at the swing that hadn't been used in 15 years, and thinking about Megan, Stuart, and Faye growing up and running around like a pack of wild animals being chased by their mother. I looked at the azalea bushes that Connie and I had planted after we moved in and thought about the good times, the sit-ins, the gatherings of friends, and the times we'd made love under the stars. Just knowing she was in my life made me feel warm and cozy, and now I felt cold and lonely. I also had a lot of unresolved feelings to deal with. The biggest unresolved issue was the extent of my responsibility for Connie swallowing the sleeping pills. I hadn't put them in her hands or forced her to swallow them, but I had definitely helped create her depressed emotional state by refusing to talk to her. I was in pain, and I wanted her to be in pain too. I loved her so much, and she had done perhaps the single thing in our marriage that would have destroyed me the fastest way I could have found out. She was my wife, my love, and I loved her more than anything. Giving myself to another destroyed me. And now I may have destroyed her. I never wanted her to die. I just wanted her to feel what I felt. Maybe she did and couldn't face it. Now I'll never know for sure. All I know for sure is that she did something wrong and ruined our marriage, and I did something equally wrong and ruined hers. We were both wrong. May God have mercy on our souls. Tomorrow is Connie's funeral, and it will be the last time I see her. I had to get my emotions under control. I had to see the faces of all our friends and family. I had to say goodbye to her. I had to not break down. I turned as I heard the front door slam, and seconds later a car came roaring down the street. Megan was walking toward me from the back door. "Dad, are you okay?" whispered Megan, settling into the lawn chair across from me. "No, not really." We sat in silence, gathering our thoughts, listening to the fallen leaves rustle in the night breeze. Megan looked at me and said, "You know none of this would have happened if you had just come home and forgiven her. She made a mistake. I'm sure you've made mistakes too that she's forgiven you for. She said she couldn't live without you. It was your pride that killed her." I just sat there with my mouth open. My own daughter was blaming me for my wife's death. I don't know how many times I had said it or thought it, but I had done nothing wrong. I wasn't the one having an affair. I didn't lie to my friends and family for 6 months. I didn't swallow a bottle of sleeping pills to ease my guilt. And Daddy's going to have a long, hard day tomorrow. Everyone is invited to the house afterward, and there will probably be a lot of people here. You don't have to do anything. You don't even have to be here if you don't want to. Stuart and a few of Mom's friends will help me with the food and stuff, so you won't have anything to worry about. Now Megan didn't even want me to come to the funeral? What the hell was going on? Maybe I was so emotional and stressed out that I had misunderstood her words. One thing was certain. I didn't want to have a confrontation with my daughter on the eve of her mother's funeral. I got up, walked into the house, and went downstairs to the family room where I slept. Next chapter. I put all my bedding in the laundry basket and put on my suit and tie. The kids were already dressed and waiting for me in the living room when I went upstairs. Dad looked tired. Faye came over and corrected my tie like her mother had done 1,000 times before. I kissed her on the forehead, took her hand, and walked out to the waiting limo. Faye held my hand the whole time. She didn't say a word to me or anyone else, but sat with her head down. When we arrived at the funeral home, many of our friends were crowded into the foyer. When the crowd saw us, they parted, and we made our way into the viewing room. All eyes were on me, but as we passed our friends and neighbors, I noticed something strange. I saw no pity in the eyes of those who looked at me. Most didn't even make eye contact. Instead, there was a look of disdain, almost contempt, on the faces of most of them. I nodded to a few, and they turned away to talk to someone else. As I passed my boss from work and his wife, he reached out his hand and shook mine, saying he was sorry. Our friends, standing on either side of him, looked at him with the same strange, contemptuous expression I had. He was the only one who said anything to me. The kids were getting expressions of sympathy from those I had already passed by. I didn't understand what was going on. After all, I didn't have much experience with funerals. The only ones I'd been directly involved in were my mother's funerals, and this one was nothing like hers. Faye escorted me to the casket, and we knelt down to pay our last respects. Quiet, soothing organ music played through the sound system, but I could still hear whispers from the crowd behind us. During the silent prayer, I caught scraps of whispered conversations. Unforgiving bastard. Left her. It's because of him. Hypocrite. Son of a bitch killed her. Faye took my hand and squeezed it. She must have heard the same words I did. The preacher's words were soothing. The hymn, sung by Connie's longtime friend, was poignant and sad. It was not the usual funeral hymn, but a song that Connie loved. At the end, she shook hands with Megan and Stuart and went to her seat. I found it odd that she didn't say anything to me or Faye. Several friends addressed the crowd as the preacher asked if anyone wanted to say anything. Megan stood up last and spoke about mercy and forgiveness and how Jesus forgave those who nailed him to the cross, and we should be as kind to those around us as he was. I'm not usually this stupid, but as I sat here and listened to my daughter preach about forgiveness, I understood. I finally understood. When we arrived at the gravesite, a cold wind was blowing. Everyone sat in silence listening to the preacher's last words. At the end of the service, the preacher handed each of us a red rose to place on the casket as we left. I went first, followed by Faye, Megan, and Stuart. Dad's old work buddy walked him past the casket. It was one of the most emotional days of my life. I reached out to stop Megan and Stuart before we left the grave. With all the bile I was capable of, I said what was boiling in my heart. Megan, Stuart, I know what was going on, and I've made a decision. Because of what you did, because of the hate you spread, and because of the moral stance you took in defending your mother and making me look evil and villainous to all of our friends and family, you are both as dead to me as that woman we just buried in the ground. Don't ever speak to me, come to my house, or socialize with me at all. From now on, I am no longer your father. I turned, looked around at the gathering of those who used to be my friends, and said, "That includes all of you." They were shocked at such a blatant expression of my hostility. Without another word, I took Faye's hand and we walked back to the limo. I told the driver to pull away as my father and his wheelchair were in the car with us, leaving Megan and Stuart standing by the roadside. Only my boss and his wife and two old friends from the next street over came to the funeral. They were all the friends I had left in the world, them and Faye, of course. Megan and Stuart went over to her house to indulge in some comfort. Faye later told me that everyone had heard how I had dumped Connie after she made a small mistake, refused to talk to her or forgive her, and pushed her to suicide. In other words, everyone knew I did it. Next chapter. Faye went back to school, leaving me alone and friendless. When she came back between semesters and over spring break, it was like turning on the lights in a dark and gloomy room. Megan was with her husband and his family, and Stuart was back in school. Between semesters, he made other preparations. The only thing that made sense was to focus on work and try to put the pain of the past behind him. It wasn't easy. 2 or 3 times a week, I woke up in the middle of the night, expecting Connie to be next to me in bed, or with the horrible way she and John Jablonski were entertained in a Holiday Inn hotel room. In her letter, she told me that her lover was an old neighbor of ours. He and his wife had moved across town about 2 years ago. The son of a bitch was even at our 25th wedding anniversary party. Time moved forward, and the pain became easier to bear. Megan gave birth to a baby girl and named her Connie. A year later, she had a baby boy whom she named Chance, after her husband's father. I never saw my grandchildren. Stuart married the girl of his dreams that he had told me about back in college. I received an invitation to their wedding, but didn't attend. 2 years later, she filed for divorce. Apparently, he followed his mother's example and cheated on his own wife. He said that everyone cheats at one time or another, and I believe this warped attitude led to his divorce. He moved to California, and I never saw him after the funeral. I know about all of this because Faye inserts little bits of information into the conversation at every opportunity. She wants me to know because no matter how wrong they are still my children. My boss at work was my best friend in the whole world. He helped me when I needed to talk it out and ignored me when I was too sick to work. Truth be told, early on, he told me he was giving me a year to get in shape or he would have to replace me. That little speech motivated me to become the best manager in the company. So good that 4 years after starting my new life, I was offered a senior manager position in Florida. Within 3 months, I sold my house, moved all my belongings to a new, much smaller home in Orlando, and began managing the entire distribution center in the eastern half of the United States. I didn't forget about Bo either. During all the turmoil, he found himself pushed aside and forgotten about. When we moved to our new home, I made it up to him by getting him another junior golden retriever. Now all 3 of us are happy in our new little home. In Maryland, I lost all of my friends. Only a few people would even talk to me, let alone ask me out. Things weren't the same, and all but a very few turned their backs on me and left me alone. I was persona non grata and invisible to everyone. Faye graduated with honors and got a great entry-level management position at a major entertainment venue in Florida. She said she will be living with me until she finds her own place. Hopefully that won't happen too soon. Dad died a year after Connie. Next chapter. It's been 5 years since my world changed. I'd lost everything I held dear except one thing, my daughter Faye. But even she was eager to make her own life. I had to find my own, or else I was destined to die a miserable old man with no one to love but my golden retrievers. Doesn't that sound pathetic? Let's face it, I needed something to do. I've always had a hobby, writing. I hadn't done anything but write business reports for the last few years, but as work became routine and I got older, I started writing short stories again. I even sold a couple to a local literary magazine. One weekend, while Faye was out on a date with her boyfriend, I started sketching out an outline for what I thought would be another short story. It turned out to be an outline for a story about a particularly difficult time in my life, and it ended up being much more than a short story. I thought long and hard before I started it because I knew it would trigger memories and emotions from the past that were better off lying in the dark depths of my mind. One evening, I started writing. 4 months later, working every night after work, I had a finished draft of a manuscript that I thought was pretty good. But I didn't want anyone reading my innermost secrets, so I put it in a box and put it on a shelf in my den. Catharsis was in the writing. I faced the demons of my past, and they were defeated. I realized I could start living again. I signed up for a creative writing class at the local community college, hoping to improve my writing skills. There were mostly 20-something guys who couldn't tell the difference between an adverb and an adjective. There were two other seniors like me in the class, and we teamed up to show the youth of America, or at least the youth of Orange County, Florida, what good writing was all about. Maurice was retired and was about to write a book about his family's involvement in the Civil War. Alicia was a widow who was researching the course catalog at the community college so she wouldn't lose her job and find something she could pursue. She raised 5 children as a stay-at-home mom, and when they were all grown, quietly retired and moved to Florida, using the insurance money she received after her husband's death as seed money for a new life. The more Alicia and I talked, the more we found common ground. I learned early on to let the person I was talking to talk and to listen carefully to everything they said because you could always ask again later. I hadn't gone on a date in almost 30 years, so I had to be very attentive to her. She would talk and I would take notes, mental notes. One day, she realized she was doing all the talking and asked me where I was from and why I was alone in Central Florida taking a writing course at a community college. I gave her the 30-minute version and tried to turn the conversation to her, but she wouldn't budge. She poked and poked and poked me with questions until I finally told her that my story was hard to tell, and if she wanted to learn about me, she should come to my house for dinner next Saturday. She gave me the biggest and most beautiful smile I had seen in the last few years and said, "Yes, it would be my pleasure." "Dinner was wonderful, Mark," Alicia said, as we stepped out onto the patio to enjoy the night air under one of my palm trees. "I don't know many men who can make a vegetable lasagna, much less one as delicious as this one. What other surprises do you have up your sleeve?" "I think you know almost everything about me. I run the Folks Industries distribution center on the east side. My daughter Faye lives with me and has graciously agreed to stay out of my way tonight. My wife died a little over 5 years ago. I have 2 other children, and you've met my 2 Goldens, Bo and Luke. That's me in a nutshell. Anyway, I'm boring. Nothing interesting to tell you." "Well, you bribed me to come to dinner tonight by telling me that if I wanted to know your story, you'd tell me one. So, I'm waiting for all the details." Instead of saying anything, I got up and went into the house. When I returned, I was holding a box filled with my novel, a novel about the biggest events in my life. What you don't know is that I've been writing for years and have even sold a couple short stories to a local literary magazine. I have a computer full of short stories, some of which are based on my life, and some of which just came out of my twisted brain. Before I signed up for a creative writing class, I wrote something I don't know what to do with. A sad story about me and my family all right here in this little box. Writing it all down helped me process the pain I felt at the time my wife died and my family broke up. I haven't shown this box to anyone yet, but would love to get your opinion on it. I think it's only good for holding the door open on a windy night, but I'd really like to hear the opinion of someone whose work I admire." She looked at me with eyes full of admiration. "I would love to read your book. What's it called?" "I call it Fair Weather Friends." "Wow, it's heavy," she said, taking the book from my hands. "It's only 987 pages. I want you to tell me what you think. Be honest. Brutal if you have to, but I want someone other than me to comment on it. I don't want to show it to my daughter because she's been through everything I've written about, and it will just bring up old feelings. I don't want to hurt her." "Mark, I would love to read your story and give you my opinion. I probably forgot to tell you that I am very particular. I tell it like it is and let the chips fall as they may, or whatever that old cliche says. I'll start tomorrow." We talked about writing classes, Florida nightlife for people our age, and ended up exchanging opinions on some of our favorite movies. We had a nice evening, and for once the Florida weather took a turn for the better. As I walked her to her car, she kissed me on the cheek. I felt like a teenager again as I cleaned up after our little dinner. Next chapter. Alicia wasn't in class for the next meeting, and I hadn't heard from her since our dinner. I began to wonder if she had asked to do a review of my book, proving to her that I was some kind of freak and should be avoided at all costs. I thought about calling her, but I didn't want to seem intrusive. 2 weeks later, she called me when I wasn't home and left a message on my answering machine. "Hi, Mark, it's Alicia. I want you to come to my house for dinner Friday night. My son is in town and staying with me for a few days, and I want you to meet him. I may have a little surprise for you when you get here, so grab a bottle or two of that fine white wine we had the other day and be here at 7. Call me back and let me know. Bye. Friday night, I dressed casually but nicely and brought 2 bottles of the 2012 Balthasar Ress Riesling Cabinet Hattenheimer Schutzenhaus. I had read in a local Orlando magazine that it was one of the best white wines of the year, and since I knew nothing about wines, I decided to trust the author of the article. It paired well with the lasagna, and I hoped it would pair well with whatever Alicia was serving. Hi, Mark. Come on in. Alicia's face lit up as she gave me a tour of her house. When we stepped out onto the patio, I saw a small table set for 3 with candles and wine glasses. A man appeared between 2 orange trees in the light of the dining table. Mark, I'd like you to meet my son Barry. Barry, this is Mark Jenkins. It's a pleasure to meet you, he said, shaking our hands. Mom has told me a lot of good things about you. She's impressed, and it takes a lot to impress her. It's nice to meet you too, Barry, but everything she said is probably a fabrication from our creative writing class. There's not much interesting about me. Alicia smiled and pointed to the table. She took the bottles of wine and put them in the refrigerator while we sat down. When she finally sat down, she smiled her beautiful smile again and took my hand. Mark, I invited you here under false pretenses. We'll eat once the wine has cooled, but first I want to talk and tell you what I think is amazing news. I think it will be a surprise to you, hopefully a good one. My curiosity piqued, but at the same time I was more than a little nervous. Mark, my son came here today to meet you because I did something that you probably wouldn't have approved of if I had asked you beforehand. But I did it, and now it's too late, so if you're going to be mad, just go ahead and be mad. Okay, here's what I did. I finished your book in 2 days and it blew me away. I couldn't tear myself away from it once I got about halfway through. It was the most inspiring and heartbreaking story I have ever read. I cried at the end of the chapter where you go to live with your father after finding out about your wife. I cried at the end when you talk about your children. Mark, this was the most fantastic book I have ever read, and I had to share it with my son. I sent it to him and he read it. He doesn't usually read unsolicited books by unknown authors, but at my request he did. He is my son, and he had no choice. Mark, he liked it too, and wants to help you edit the book so he can publish it later. Isn't that fantastic? I just sat there looking at her and she smiled back at me. I didn't know what to say or do. I probably looked pretty stupid, but I couldn't help it. When I shifted my gaze to Barry, he smiled back and started where his mother had left off. Mom's right, Mr. Jenkins. This is the best first novel I've ever read, and I've read quite a few. You see, I work at Prentice Press in New York, and I'm the assistant managing editor in charge of screening submissions from authors like you. We get about 100 new books a month, and I have to read them and evaluate them before sending them to 2 other reviewers. If we all agree that what we read is worthy of publication, we work with the author to have their manuscript edited and prepared for publication. Your book has gone through this process, and we want to publish it. We can discuss the details after dinner, but for now, I want to congratulate you on creating such a moving book. It will be a real winner. I was dumbfounded. I'm sure now that the expression on my face went from stupid to idiotic in the blink of an eye. Alicia's smile increased tenfold as she watched me sit there with an idiotic expression on my face, not knowing what to say. Finally, she stood up, kissed me on the forehead, and went to get dinner. While making the salad, I regained the power of speech. We talked about my book and parts of it. I saw Alicia tear up as we talked about certain parts, and I know I did too. We ate Alicia's version of mahi-mahi cooked by Alicia and talked some more. While we ate sweet peach cobbler, Barry outlined the process and the work I needed to do. He talked about promoting the book and what royalties I could expect. I wasn't going to get rich. By the time he drifted off to sleep, my head was spinning with everything I'd just learned. Alicia poured the last of the wine, and we sat together in the cool night breeze and talked about what it was like to be a famous author like Stephen King or J.K. Rowling. I wasn't in their class, but it was fun to fantasize a bit about the subject. It was past midnight when I got back to Earth and decided it was time to head home. Alicia walked me to my car, and this time didn't just give me a kiss on the cheek. I received a full-blown kiss to my very soul that reminded me that I may be 55 years old, but I wasn't dead yet. I hadn't felt anything like that since Connie. The thought made me sad. Next chapter. For the next 3 months, I worked with one of the editors at Prentice Press, revising and polishing my manuscript. We had one face-to-face meeting and many emails and phone calls. The first thing I had to do was to transfer my MS Word version into the software package they recommended. I found it very easy to use for editing, but quite cumbersome when creating new pieces from scratch. When we were both satisfied with the final product, a printed sheet appeared in the FedEx overnight mail, and I spent the entire weekend going through it sentence by sentence, word by word. No matter how many times I reread it, I always found something to change that I knew was 100% better. My editor warned me it would be. She turned out to be right, as always. I worked all day at Falks Industries and all evening on my novel. Faye was absolutely thrilled with my book. I told her she couldn't read it until I got the first copy from the publisher. She made sure I ate, exercised, and watched the evening news before bed. She was like an old mother hen. Alicia, on the other hand, only came over on weekends. She said she didn't want to deprive me of my creative energies. We'd go out to dinner or I'd cook something at home. We talked about everything. Nothing was off limits. I don't think any expensive psychiatrist could have done more for me than she did. The more I talked about my past, the better I felt. Apparently, I never got over what Connie had done to me and what I had done to her. I now realized that we were both to blame, and each of us was in our own book. Our friendship grew strongly, and the day I sent Prentice my latest changes to the Galif, she said she was going to reward me when I was finished. She stayed the night, and we rewarded each other over and over again. Faye came home for a few minutes, and when she realized I had company, she went back out and stayed with her boyfriend. Alicia opened up a new appreciation of life in me. My book appeared in stores on May 1st. I was contractually obligated to do several in-person signing sessions around the country, one of which was in Ellicott City, my old hometown in Maryland. I was both alarmed and terrified by the event. I took 3 weeks of vacation and went on a book tour. One might imagine the life of an author as glamorous and uncomplicated. In reality, it wasn't at all. For 28 days straight, my routine consisted of flying or taking the train to a new city, checking into a hotel without unpacking because I wasn't going to stay there long, going to a book signing and talking to everyone in a long line of well-wishers and fans about how my book had changed their lives. I really enjoyed chatting with everyone at the book signing, but the travel and hotels got boring quickly. Alicia showed up unannounced to have me sign her book for her in 2 cities, and my book signing tour routine was replaced with absolute joy. She acted shy and demure, and I played world-famous author seducing one of the local women. She stayed the night and helped me stretch out all the aches and pains that air travel can cause. Every time she left, I felt a void in myself where she used to be. We talked on the phone, but it wasn't the same as holding her in my arms. I began to feel something I hadn't felt in years, something in my heart that only someone in love can understand. I hoped she felt the same way. The last stop on my tour was my old hometown. I asked if it could be arranged to be the last one, and Prentice was very gracious. I knew well the bookstore where I was to meet the public, for it was only a few miles from my old home. The event was to begin at noon and last until 4 o'clock. When I arrived at the store, there was already a long line of people waiting in front of a table on which 50 or so copies of my book were neatly laid out, along with a large poster with my picture on the cover and a picture of the book announcing what time I would be available for book signings. I looked around and saw a few people in line that I remembered. First in line were my former boss and his wife. I immediately went over to them and gave them both a hug, then got a high sign that I should sit down and start signing books. We exchanged phone numbers, addresses, and email addresses, and I promised to come back and take them both out to dinner. I was so happy to see them that I almost forgot about the growing line behind them. I signed books, chatted with them, and smiled at everyone in line. A couple times I got up to take a picture with someone. Overall, it was a much better experience than I expected. About 30 minutes into the experience, one of my old friends came up to me and held out my book. He was one of those people at Connie's funeral who wouldn't look me in the eye or talk to me. I signed the book to my old friend, after which I smiled and gave him a friendly handshake. Then he did something I didn't expect. He said in a very quiet voice, "I'm sorry for the way I treated you. I didn't realize until I read your book." He shamefully turned and walked away. Similar apologies were heard from several of my former friends throughout the day. People I called friends apologized for the way they treated me or judged me. I was almost embarrassed when they left. The most surreal moment occurred when Lenore Jablonski approached the table with a copy of my book to autograph. She approached with an awkward grin and said, "Hi, Mark. I'm sorry to see you again after everything that's happened, but I thought I should meet you and sympathize a little. I can't apologize for what John did to you, but if it makes any difference, you should know that I kicked that son of a bitch out shortly after Connie died. We've been divorced for 4 years, and I'm engaged to a contractor from Annapolis. And just in case you heard anything, there was a rumor going around town that you were looking for John to get a little revenge for the pain he caused. He must have heard that, because one day he quit his job and took a job in Saudi Arabia as some kind of computer consultant. I haven't seen him since. Oh, and yes, I'm the one who started the rumor." She stood in front of the desk, smiling and holding out the book. I didn't know what to do or say. After a moment of silence where we just looked at each other, I took the book and signed, "To Lenora, no fair weather friend. I hope that some of the words in my book will help you find your deliverance as I have found mine. Thanks for listening. Mark." I walked around the table and we hugged for a moment before she left. By the end of the appointed time, there was still a line in front of the table. I looked up and was stunned. Megan was standing by one of the book racks watching what was going on. She didn't come over and say anything, and she had a rather subdued look about her. When I looked up, signing the next book, she was gone. I got up and looked around, but she was already gone. Last in line was Faye. We hugged and made small talk as she walked me to her car. She drove me back to my hotel, and no, it wasn't a Holiday Inn, and we sat in the car for a long time talking about Alicia. Faye liked her and hoped I did too. When I told her I thought I was in love with her, she put her arms around me and sobbed on my neck. Luckily, just as she was hugging me, a police car appeared nearby and flashed its headlights. Police Sergeant Greg got out of the car and tapped on the window. As we all got to know each other, it was like old home week. We talked, laughed, hugged, and I told him what I was doing in town. He hadn't read my book, so I pulled out one of my stockpile and signed it for him. On the cover, I wrote, "Greg, meeting you changed my life. No offense, someone had to do it. Mark." Greg had to go off on business, and Faye and I went to the house and had dinner. All in all, going back to where it all started wasn't as traumatic as I had expected. Next chapter. It was a big shock to me to see Megan on the other side of my door. Alicia and I had just finished breakfast and were discussing the latest New York Times bestseller list and the fact that Friends in the Weather was ranked 3rd in the nonfiction category. But all that faded into the background when I saw my daughter. "Hi, Daddy. How are you?" asked Megan, with a note of embarrassment in her voice. "Hi, Megan. I'm fine. What can I do for you?" "I was just in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop to see how you were doing." "This neighborhood is 900 miles from yours, Megan. A little out of the way, isn't it?" I felt a hand on my shoulder and turned to see Alicia standing there. "Would you like to introduce me to Mark?" she said with more than a commanding note in her voice. "Alicia, this is my daughter Megan." Alicia squeezed past me and hugged Megan tightly. "Come on in. I've heard so much about you." The two women completely ignored me as they made their way into the living room. They sat down at the table and talked nonstop for an hour, leaving me to clean the kitchen and take care of other household chores that needed to be done. I only passed by the living room a couple times during the cleaning, and they chatted and giggled the whole time. Alicia oohed and ahed when Megan showed her pictures of her kids. "Honey, come out here and join us," Alicia called out. I immediately knew I needed to order, so I came out and sat down next to her. She grabbed my hand, more to keep me from leaving than as a sign of affection. Megan stared at our intertwined fingers. Everyone was silent for longer than seemed comfortable. "Okay, since you both don't want to say anything, I'll do it," Alicia said in a stern tone. "Mark, I invited Megan here because she wants to tell you something. I knew you wouldn't invite her, so I did. I know I'm just a guest in your house, but if you want me to continue to be a guest, then you're going to sit here and listen to her." My gaze darted back and forth between Megan and Alicia. They had me surrounded, and I didn't want to start another battle, so I sat back and prepared myself. "Dad, I came to see how you're doing, and that's no lie. I also came to apologize to you. Dad, I was wrong about a lot of things, and most of all about you. I was convinced that everything that happened to Mom, Stuart, and me was your fault. I could only see a fraction of what happened then. It wasn't until I read your book that I saw everything from your point of view. I felt like such a fool after reading what you wrote and how hurt you were. I guess I never thought you had feelings. After all, you barely expressed them when we were little. Your book helped me grow up a little. I never realized that I am a grown woman with a husband and children, yet I remain an innocent little girl to you. I always thought Mom was a saint, even after the horrible things she did to you. You were always strong and confident, unaffected by anything that happened in the world, but I see now that it was a facade you used to protect your feelings. Mom broke through that shield and hurt you more than I could have ever imagined. I believe that if you could have been as strong with her, said you forgave her, and come home, everything would have been okay. I didn't realize that you were strong, so strong that you stepped away from the one you loved for over 25 years to protect all of us from her mistake. Dad, I'm sorry for not giving you your due. Instead, I abandoned you and told everyone we knew that it was all your fault. After Mom died, I told people that she died because of what you did. I was wrong, and I realize it now. I have just started to correct my mistakes. I bought many copies of your book and distributed them to all of your and Mom's old friends and asked them to read it. I told each of them that you did nothing wrong and were hurt by what happened more than anyone could imagine. I saw you at a book launch a few weeks ago and stood watching you. I wanted to come over and hug you, but I didn't have the guts. Today, I am here to apologize and ask that you consider being a part of my life again. It's been over 5 years now. You have 2 of the most beautiful little grandchildren that you have never seen. I want you to come home. I want you to be my father again. I don't want to be dead to you anymore. I love you, Daddy, and I need you to love me again. Please? Megan put her head down in her arms and began to cry. At that moment, I felt a prick of guilt. As I shifted my gaze to Alicia, I saw that she was looking at me, waiting to see what I would do. I pondered her words and how I should handle the situation. As I pondered, I decided to use delaying tactics. "What about Stuart?" I asked Megan. "How does he feel about me? Did he know you were coming here?" "Stuart is such an asshole. I think what Mom did hurt him the most. After Lori caught him running around and divorced him, he moved to California and started living a rambunctious lifestyle there. The last few years he's been bouncing from one girlfriend to another. From what I heard, he was dating one married woman whose husband was adamantly opposed to their relationship, and Stuart decided to leave town or face the consequences. He still thinks everyone cheats, and there's nothing wrong with it. He doesn't know I'm here, and I don't care what he thinks." Nah. Her little tirade didn't give me enough time to think about what I wanted to do, so I decided to hang back again. "Megan, what are your plans now? Are you staying in town? Do you have a place to stay? What?" "I'm staying at Faye's. She wanted me to check out her new apartment, so I'm going to stay there for a couple days and then come home. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll think about everything you said today, and I'll let you know what I decide. That's the best thing I can do at the moment." "Dad, honestly, I didn't even expect even this much. Thank you. I'm going to go see Faye now. Alicia, it was nice to finally meet you. I hope to see you again soon. Take care of my dad for me. Megan left as suddenly as she had appeared. I had a lot to think about, but this time I had a guide who wouldn't let me do anything stupid. Alicia was a part of me now, and I couldn't imagine my life without her. When I was alone with Alicia, I let my emotions run wild. I didn't want her to see me cry. Next chapter. When Alicia and I returned from our Caribbean cruise, we flew straight to Maryland. The cruise was a gift from Prentice Press because the book, Friends in the Weather, had hit #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. I met my 2 grandchildren, who are now 2 and 4 years old, and showed Alicia around town. There were many memories in the old place, and Megan and I began to make new ones, again as father and daughter. Alicia had a lot of experience as a grandparent, and she gave me some much-needed advice to help me through the awkward moments. But the best moment came at dinner with Megan's family when I informed them that Alicia and I had decided to get married. We had made this decision during the cruise and wanted to let Megan know the second time around. Faye had already started planning the wedding. We were going to visit Alicia's children and tell them the news. Alicia and I are very happy. We both said that when we were young, we never would have thought our lives would turn out the way they did. With the naivety of youth, we believed we were invincible and that our first true love would be our first and last. But it didn't happen like a fairy tale, but like millions of other real stories. I was happy with Connie for 25 years, and I expect to be just as happy with Alicia for the next 25 years. Maybe I'll write another book about it. Grow old with me. The best is yet to come, the last life for which the first was created. Our times are in his hand, who says, I have conceived the whole. Youth shows only half. Trust God, see the whole, fear not. Heck, Robert Browning was smart. Thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed it, so subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.